the uber-rich, prime ministers and princes. Yet the May 29 through June 1st, 2014 secret gathering in Copenhagen, Denmark, had a few strange attendees. Bilderberg 2014 was gorged with biochemists, doctors, and pharmaceutical heads, as if the Bilderbergers, who have long openly decried the overpopulation of the planet, expected some pandemic to soon weed out the world population, predicting perhaps something like the Ebola virus that is now quickly spreading across the planet. Pandemic-connected attendees included Trilateral Commission member and disease epidemiologist Heather Monroe Bloom, University of Copenhagen biomedical professor Søren Peter Olsen, and pharmaceutical industry-connected Jørgen Huno Rasmussen. Like war, pandemics generate lots of money for the billionaires and bankers. The Ebola pandemic began to rear its ugly head right before the Bilderbergers were toasting glasses of $1,000 champagne.
I can tell you that Ebola is coming along. It's the right disease at the right time, and there are some very suspicious things going on with Ebola. What's coming is so horrific, so terrible. Ebola is going to be the pandemic that really thins out the herd, gets us into medical martial law, gets us into full martial law lockdown, in complete compliance with moving towards the Third World War.
According to the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, from November 2012 to March of 2014, there were a total of 6 cases of Ebola worldwide. Beginning in March of 2014, up until the present, the number jumped to a staggering 1,383 cases, and that number is now rising at an alarming rate.
Imagine a virus, the most terrifying virus you can, and then imagine that you and you alone have the cure.
The perfect script for a horror movie. A virus with no vaccine and no cure kills thousands of people.
5 billion people died in 1996 and 1997. Almost the entire population of the world. Only about 1% of us survived.
More reports of flu cases along the border, but officials are saying they aren't connected.
Surely there's very real and very convincing data that the planet cannot survive the excesses of the human race.
And I actually think the world will be much better when there's only 10 or 20% of us left. Dr. Eric Bianca.
But most frightening was the fact that in a crowd of over 1,000 prominent scientists, local newspapers reported that 95% of those in attendance gave Bianca sustained standing ovations every time he extolled the virtues of mass-culling microbes and man's destruction, and went on to laud the virtues of Ebola because it would kill 90% of the world population quickly.
A top German virologist has caused shockwaves by asserting that it's too late to halt the spread of the Ebola virus.
In other news, the CDC is receiving reports of a possible flu outbreak in San Francisco.
San Francisco, New Orleans, Rio de Janeiro, Rome, Kinshasa, Karachi, Bangkok, then Peking.
Rome, Kinshasa, Karachi, Bangkok, Peking. This is some trip you're taking, sir. Is this all in 1 week?
Business.
There you see. Also invisible to the naked eye. It doesn't even have an odor.
They are now calling this a true pandemic. 5 years on.
Still no cure.
No cure.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given £31 million to help battle the Ebola epidemic in Africa. It is hoped it will also speed up the development of drugs and vaccines, as Ebola has killed more than half of its 4,300 victims.
First, we've got population. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero, pretty near to zero, pretty near to zero. Population, pretty near to zero.
Attention. Due to the extremity of the simian flu crisis, all regular government functions have been suspended indefinitely.
The Kissinger-authored U.S. plan targeted 13 key countries where massive population reduction was called for. Kissinger recommended that IMF and World Bank loans be given on condition that nations initiate aggressive population control programs, such as sterilization.
draft copy of the United Nations Global Biodiversity Assessment, it states very clearly that we must reduce the human population from its current level of about 6 billion people down to about 1 billion people.
In 1800, there was 1 billion people here. Everybody agrees there were about 1 billion people around 1800. And everybody agrees the population is growing rapidly. But the world is not overcrowded. Don't fall for that overcrowded propaganda going around the schools. The world is not overcrowded. The whole world's population today, all 6 billion people, would fit inside Jacksonville, Florida. Twice. That little city has 25 billion square feet. The world's not overcrowded, folks. Have you driven across Nebraska? Or Kansas? Or New Mexico? There's plenty of room out there, other places, okay? Back when Jesus was here, the world's population was only about 250 million. It looks like the whole population growth curve started about 4,400 years ago. Now, if you believe in evolution, you got a problem. You think man's been here for 3 million years. In 3 million years, the population would have grown. There'd be about 150,000 people per square inch. That would be crowded. No, man's not been here for millions of years. God told Adam to replenish the earth, fill it with kids, have lots of kids, okay? He formed the world to be inhabited, Isaiah 45 tells us, okay? But we got people on the other side who think we should reduce the population of the earth. That's Satan's plan, of course. Jacques Cousteau said we need to eliminate 350,000 people a day. Ted Turner said we need a 95% decline in populations. Okay, Ted, you first. These guys for the New World Order want to reduce the population of the world to 500 million. See, Satan was told by the Lord in the Garden of Eden, you're going to crawl on your belly and eat dust all your life. So he's decided he's going to kill every human being on the planet. Satan's goal is to kill all of humanity, to thwart God's plan.
There is an event coming, Steve, in the very near-term future that is going to affect the United States of America to its very soul.
Bill Clinton signed the Biodiversity Treaty that said we need to reduce the Earth's population to 1 billion. They've already got the Earth divided up into regions. The red areas are for animals only. No human beings allowed. Treaty's been signed. It just hasn't been enforced yet. Coming soon, though. Peter Singer is the guy who wants to have abortions after the baby's born. You got 28 days to decide if you want to keep it. He said Christianity is our foe. If animal rights is to succeed, we must destroy the Judeo-Christian religious tradition. Like animals have more rights than humans. Greg said the world has cancer. The cancer is man. Prince Philip said if I could be reincarnated, I would wish to return to Earth as a killer virus to lower human population levels. Nice guy, Phil. By the way, Monsanto's real busy on working on genetically modified foods. They banned them in Europe. But 70% of everything you eat now contains genetically modified foods, causing all kinds of problems with health. Get the book Seeds of Deception if you want a whole lot more on that. Or Engineered Extinction from the New American Magazine about how our food is being tampered with to reduce the population. The United Nations said food is power. We use it to control behavior. We do not apologize. There are people who want to reduce the population of the earth. Go outside of Atlanta, Georgia to the town of Elberton. Go north about 7 or 8 miles on Highway 77 and look off to the right. You'll see a place over there where they teach you should reduce the population of the planet. If you look off to the right, you'll see these stones over here. It looks like Stonehenge. You drive over there, it's the weirdest place, middle of nowhere.
If you're not familiar with the Georgia Guidestones, here's a couple of diagrams of it. Basically, it's the Illuminati's 10 Commandments. It's literally 10 Commandments carved in stone into granite slabs, and these 20-foot tall slabs, in 8 different languages that basically call for a massive world human population reduction, of global government, a global court, and call human beings a cancer on the earth. And so basically this is a monument to the Illuminati's population reduction agenda. They see the masses of humans as being a bunch of useless eaters, using up the earth's resources that they're going to need to live forever as gods on planet Earth. Ebola virus fears obviously adding fuel to this fire. But here we have a satanic monument calling for the death of, 95% of the world's population, reducing people down to 500 million people.
Well, now hold on a minute. There's already 6 billion people here. How do they propose to maintain humanity under 500 million?
What is being planned as you and I are on the air tonight, and what has been coming together into that old term, the perfect storm, is literally brewing right over our heads.
Looks to me like there's going to have to be a dramatic drop in population. That's exactly what the devil wants.
It is and includes military maneuvers in the United States, military actions that are forthcoming, and that will be so deep and so penetrating that the United States will never be the same.
We have this map that shows how the U.S. would be divided in the event of an emergency, if we can pull that out there. There it is. So this is how the U.S. will be divided into districts. You see 10 of them there. This is according to the National Emergency Center establishment.
It gives FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security jurisdiction over what goes on in these places during a time of emergency.
When the whole world's collapsing and we're still sitting around having no idea what's going to happen once it gets here, and we have such a self-centered, yuppie society, can you imagine when hard times really hit America, what it's going to be like? The answer is it's going to be hellish. It's going to be barbarous. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. When this empire goes down, which is it's designed to do, and fold into the new global order, it is going to be spectacularly horrible.
The final step after the world's subjugated is to usher in the age of transhumanism, where the elite meld themselves with machine in some kind of attempt to gain immortality, while the people they let live, about 10% of us, will be their genetically dumbed-down, engineered, subservient slaves. It's promising, I think, to bring humanity its darkest days. The people they let live they'll be living in, we know the megacities. There are 11 megacities planned. They're going to be densely populated with 6 million people, but that also tells you, too, how many of us they're going to wipe out. If you've got a country of 315 million people, and you've got 11 communities of 66 million total, that tells you what the casualty rate is. How they're going to get us to there, the pandemic releases that are going on right now. And I think really at the heart of this is the Ebola virus. And the whole notion where this is headed ultimately is the Third World War. The bankers in Basel, the big guys that run the central banks, the Bank of International Settlements, want these wars of unification so they can bring about their new world order. There is no stopping it. America had its chance to mobilize and try to stop the coming tyranny, but we couldn't get off the couch, stop watching the NFL. Well, the new NFL term stands for not for long, and that's how much time this country has left. Americans have been wallowing in their own apathy and ignorance for decades. Soon they'll be wallowing in their own blood.
Centric oligarchy, where you can't say the Bilderberger runs it, or the Trilateral, or the CFR, or Bohemian Grove, or whatever it is. All of those are power centers that jostle each other and coexist. But what they amount to is an oligarchy. The mentality of oligarchy always depends on the idea that there's an elite and a mass, and there can't be anything in between. There's really no room for a middle class in oligarchy. So the elite has to justify itself based on what? Why should they rule? Are they smarter? Are they more efficient? Are they better? They're probably none of those things. They're probably inferior in many ways. So they've got to find other ways to justify what is an irrational principle of domination. So oligarchs generally find ways to argue that the mass of people are inferior, that their lives are not worth living, and indeed that they're closer to animals than they are to the elite. Whenever you have an oligarchical elite, they're always going to try to portray the masses as ignorant beasts, inferior, and that's what we see.
Sometimes called the American Stonehenge, the astronomically aligned Georgia Guidestones located in Elbert County, Georgia, contain 10 guidelines for the future of humanity. The most ominous guideline reads, quote, "Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature," a figure which of course couldn't possibly be achieved without either mass genocide or draconian and long-lasting programs of population control. Indeed, the official guidebook to the Georgia Guidestones lists the purpose of the monument as a message to the world of the pressing, quote, "need to control human numbers via, quote, control of childbearing by programs of population control instituted by governments worldwide as part of a move towards the establishment of, quote, an effective world government." So this monument is basically an homage to a world dictatorship as part of a creepy, authoritarian, Brave New World style cradle-to-grave tyranny dressed up as a utopia.
Bill Gates said the other night that this is not going to be the last epidemic. Bill Gates is up to his neck in this. They are not going to lose the money. You know, Rockefeller, you've got Kissinger all over the place. You've got Brzezinski out there blabbing his mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how they roll. What bioweapon are they going to release on us next?
We wait until they get sleepy. Wait until they get so big they can barely move. Then we walk out of the shadows. Quietly walk out of the dark. And strike.
My name is Dr. Gil Mobley. I'm an MD. I'm an emergency trauma physician and a microbiologist. I'm here this morning in the Atlanta airport to put out a public call for action. I believe the CDC is being dishonest with us about the propensity of importing Ebola cases to the United States. Once this disease consumes every third world country, as surely it will, because they lack the same basic infrastructure as Sierra Leone and Liberia, it will devour these countries. And at that point, we will be importing clusters of Ebola on a daily basis. That will overwhelm any advanced country's ability to contain the clusters with isolation and quarantine. That spells bad news. The CDC last week said the chance of importing Ebola was infinitesimal. And that was the same day the patient was misdiagnosed in Dallas. The CDC is derelict in their duty. Yesterday I came through International Customs in the Atlanta airport. The only question they asked arriving passengers is if they had tobacco or alcohol. That is dereliction of duty. The CDC is asleep at the wheel.
And the head of the CDC, when asked if there should be more rigorous airport screening, says this: like any intervention, there are upsides and downsides. There are a lot of downsides. You slow travel. You end up costing people money. And if you have a positive, where are you going to bring them? If you have a positive, where are you going to bring them? You're the head of the CDC. Are you stupid? So you'd rather put us in danger. You're the head of the CDC. You find a place to put them and treat them. And then White House spokesman Josh Earnest says that screening procedures are in place at our border and people are screened as soon as they get here. Yet our government minimizes the danger and also the means of transmission. What's that? You're saying that because you don't want people to panic? You don't want us to panic. How about I don't want us to die? Tell us the truth for once. The fact that we're even having this discussion is insane. Your job is to protect us.
First and foremost, I want the American people to know that our experts here at the CDC and across our government agree that the chances of an Ebola outbreak here in the United States are extremely low.
The world is less violent than it has ever been. It is healthier than it has ever been.
Right. And you can keep your doctor in your health care plan. Al-Qaeda's on the run, and ISIS is not Islamic. Ebola. What a mess.
Today, I'm pleased to announce members of my science and technology team. Dr. John Holdren has agreed to serve as Assistant to the President for Science and Technology and Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy.
John P. Holdren is the resident science czar of the Obama White House. He's the head of the White House Council on Science and Technology, key advisor. This man is a Malthusian fanatic. He's a radical environmentalist, an ecological fanatic, a green kook, a wacko, except that it's also very sinister because the implications of his belief structure and his world outlook are genocide. He says that population is the root of all human problems. Humanity is a cancer on the face of the earth. Now again, the note of genocide puts Holdren in a league which is far beyond Hitler in terms of the number of victims that these policies would result in. Holdren believes that there's a world optimum population, or carrying capacity. Holdren says that the optimum world population is 1 billion. Now let's pause. At the time Holdren wrote that, the world population was already 4 billion. Today, if you say the optimum population is 1 billion, it would mean that more than 5 billion would have to go. And again, these are orders of magnitude that Hitler, Stalin, and Mao never dreamed of. Only in the mind of fanatics like Holdren do we get genocide of these proportions. That's what Holdren wants for you and your family. In order to enforce this, he talks about a supranational monstrosity that he calls a planetary regime. This means a world empire, a supranational, one-world government that would attempt to control all details of human life. The temperature in your living room, the kind of car you have, the amount you get to eat, whether you have a pet. He talks about all kinds of forced sterilization, obligatory vasectomy once you had 2 children in the family, compulsory abortion. Think about that. He wants to have licenses for birth. In other words, the woman is not allowed to give birth unless she's purchased a marketable birth license. And what happens to people that are born illegitimately, meaning without a birth permit? He even writes about infanticide. He says that infanticide is found in many primitive peoples. And he says, well, what that means is that these societies thought that the survival of the group and the collectivity was more important than the individual, so they didn't hesitate to kill babies, which implies Holdren's idea of civilization. It's a form of barbarity. Holdren writes books about nuclear target selection, nuclear war. He's a strangelove. This is all in the Nazi or quasi-Nazi tradition of the 20s and 30s. Naturally, as this becomes more extreme, as the breakdown crisis gets worse, and it is getting worse, as the depression deepens, you get into the definitions of useless eaters, lives not worthy of being lived. Humanity is a cancer on the face of the earth. So the ultimate logic of all this is extermination, genocide, the concentration camp, depopulation, and a horror that goes beyond anything seen in the 20th century. That's where Obama is essentially leading.
The Patriot Act, Homeland Security, the Military Tribunals Act, and other legislations are all completely and entirely designed to destroy your civil liberties and limit your ability to fight back against what is coming. Currently in the United States, unannounced to most brainwashed Americans, your home can be searched without a warrant, without you being home. You can in turn be arrested with no charges revealed to you, detained indefinitely with no access to a lawyer, and legally tortured, all under the suspicion that you might be a terrorist.
What it shows, again, is the anti-human fanaticism, the genocidal fury of the Anglo-American ruling elite, that they hate people and they're determined to exterminate people, and that's what they're into. And if you want to live with a ruling class like that, it's going to be nasty, brutish, and short.
Are the Bilderbergers really planning on making trillions on an Ebola vaccine while waiting just long enough to kill millions so an Ebola vaccine is demanded worldwide for top dollar? Perhaps it is just a conspiracy theory that the CDC is ignoring Obama's open border policy, leading to thousands of illegals being shipped in carrying tuberculosis, and no doubt soon, Ebola.
I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. You ask what is our policy? To wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. What is our aim? Victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. But without victory, there is no survival.
In times like these, great leaders understand both the enormity and the urgency of the situation. They take the reins and they lead. Not our president. He channels Teddy Roosevelt. But instead of speak softly and carry a big stick, it's speak softly and carry a big Bertha. You need to leave the White House. Remove yourself from the most powerful position on earth. You are putting Americans on the wrong side of history, risking everything we worked for.
Just to name a few, Ben Bernanke, Ted Turner, and Bill Gates. Their history and influence runs so deep that we're going to have to keep this short. Bernanke is the chairman of our central bank, the Federal Reserve. A central bank is one of the main reasons we revolted against England. Thomas Jefferson was even quoted saying, "A central bank is more menacing to the American people than a standing army." Bernanke has the power to and is responsible for inflating the currency, blowing up the real estate bubble, handing out trillions to Wall Street cronies, and along with Hank Paulson, bailed out AIG, Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America in 2008. Bernanke's current vision is to drive America into a hyperinflation depression in order to get rid of the middle class and leave us with a super rich and a super poor. Yet this man is not being brought to justice. While America is being destroyed by design, we are more concerned with our favorite sports team or the latest celebrity gossip than our very own country our forefathers conquered. Likewise, Ted Turner is one of the largest U.S. landowners. He is also owner of CNN, TNT, MGM, CTN, cable networks. Turner has great influence, but it's his obsession with reducing the world's population that we need to be wary of. He has been quoted saying, "A total population of 250 to 300 million people, a 95% decline from present levels, would be ideal." What he simply is saying here is that we need to kill off over 6 billion people. I bet he's including himself. This is this man's vision. And he has been using eugenics and his brain-controlling media to push his agenda. And he is not alone in this quest. He actually has close billionaire buddies who feel the same way he does, such as William Gates, known for founding Microsoft, has been hiding under his cute, friendly image when in reality also wants to exterminate large amounts of the population. Gates plans to do this using vaccines and healthcare of all things. Listen to this clip carefully, where he admits to it.
Now, we put out a lot of carbon dioxide every year, over 26 billion tons. For each American, it's about 20 tons. For people in poor countries, it's less than 1 ton. It's an average about 5 tons for everyone on the planet. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. Now that's back from high school algebra, but let's take a look. First, we've got population. Now the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. We've seen now there's a type of foreign assistance for vaccines or for AIDS treatment that are incredibly effective. These are all about saving lives. And the good news is that as you make those breakthroughs, the population growth in the country goes down. We've seen now there's a type of foreign assistance for vaccines or for AIDS treatment that are incredibly effective. These are all about saving lives. And the good news is that as you make those breakthroughs, the population growth in the country goes down. We've seen now there's a type of foreign assistance for vaccines or for AIDS treatment that are incredibly effective. These are all about saving lives. And the good news is that as you make those breakthroughs, the population growth in the country goes down. So this is a wish. It's a very concrete wish that we invent this technology. If you gave me only one wish for the next 50 years, I can pick who's president, I can pick a vaccine, which is something I love, I can pick a vaccine, which is something I love, I can pick a vaccine, which is something I love, I can pick a vaccine, which is something I love, I can pick a vaccine, which is something I love.
Wow, I thought vaccines were there to prevent our illness. And isn't healthcare supposed to be there to keep us healthy and in better care? The truth is, these men use these tools as a way to condition us into believing that they are for our own good, but in reality, it's the very thing that's killing us. Therefore, action must be taken in order to make more of us, the people, aware of their agenda.
On a global basis, plants in the United States is the envy of other countries because it's able to try out things, innovative and diverse things, although with a very high failure rate, with enough of a success rate to really come up with big breakthroughs.
Multiple overseas media outlets have reported on the fact that polio vaccines linked to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and his Gavi Alliance have on record caused nearly 48,000 children in India to suffer neurological damage and become permanently paralyzed. Most recently, over 50 African children from Chad also began convulsing after receiving a Gates Foundation-funded meningitis vaccine that specifically targets African people. Those children, some as young as 7, have also subsequently become paralyzed.
Not doing it will be catastrophic. We'll have 8 degrees, we'll be 8 degrees hotter in 30 or 40 years, and basically none of the crops will grow. Most of the people will have died, and the rest of us will be cannibals. Civilization will have broken down. What the few people who are left will be living in a failed state like Somalia or Sudan, and living conditions will be intolerable. The droughts will be so bad there'll be no more corn growing. But not doing it is suicide. Just like dropping bombs on each other, nuclear weapons is suicide. So we've got to stop doing the two suicidal things, which are hanging on to our nuclear weapons, and global and then after that we've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff.
The product in Japan, Spain, and France. By the way, Joe, government officials in France that allowed that to happen actually had to go to prison for it. In America, not one corporate executive for this company has been indicted or even criminally investigated by our Justice Department.
Why not? What, you're telling me that these people that dumped this AIDS-tainted blood in foreign countries, who killed children, have not been taken to task in the United States?
It's worse than that. The U.S. government allowed it to happen. The FDA allowed this to happen. And now the government is completely looking the other way. Thousands of innocent hemophiliacs have died from the AIDS virus. And not only they're dying, their family members are dying because they're becoming infected with the disease. This company knew absolutely that they had a problem with the product. They knew that it was infected with AIDS. They dumped it because they wanted to turn this disaster into a profit.
Mike, I want to read to you what Bayer told the New York Times about this scandal. They said Bayer behaved responsibly, ethically, and humanely. Decisions made nearly 2 decades ago were based on the best scientific information of the time and were consistent with the regulations in place. That sounds like a lot of legal mumbo-jumbo. Now, you say you have internal documents that show that they knew that this drug they were dumping was tainted with the AIDS drug? Or the AIDS virus?
The documents show that there was no question that this company absolutely understood the risk, that they knew that it was contaminated. It wasn't a possibility. They knew it was contaminated. Americans were dying from the product before it was pulled off the market. The only reason it was pulled off the market is because lawyers found the documents and showed it to the government, and finally the government said, you can't sell it here, but then the government allowed them to dump it in Spain, France, and Japan.
That's amazing. That's just amazing. Well, I want to read to you what the New York Times said, and this is an investigation that they also did, and they said the federal government was part of the problem while the Food and Drug Administration told the company not to ship the drugs overseas. The man responsible for the drug supply, quote, asked that the issue be quietly solved without alerting the Congress, the medical community, and the public. This is a cover-up, and our Congress is not doing anything. What should Americans do?
If the virus did not exist anywhere in nature, the question is raised as to where exactly the virus all of a sudden stemmed from. Published an article making the first detailed charges of AIDS as being a counter-biological warfare agent. As the first American anthropologist was quoted, claiming that AIDS is genetically engineered by the U.S. Army's biological warfare laboratory at Fort Detrick near Frederick, Maryland. Then on October 30th, 1985, the Soviet journal, Platoon Gazeta, repeated the charges made by the Indian newspaper, making it an international controversy. All this, however, was easily passed off as a communist rhetoric by the Masonic West. However, on October 26, 1986, the Sunday Express became the first Western newspaper to run a front-page story confirming the findings of the Indian and Soviet newspapers entitled AIDS Lab Shock. Of the earth.
An article published in Rolling Stone magazine by freelance journalist Tom Curtis linked the origin of AIDS to the polio vaccine.
It looked at the polio campaign that Dr. Kaprowski had undertaken in the former Belgian Congo in the middle to late 1950s. And I did focus on that campaign because of certain geographic similarities to where scientists were saying AIDS had begun in the human population, which was in this same region.
Curtis's hypothesis shook up the scientific community because it questioned the work of Hilary Kaprowski, a famous researcher and pioneer in the fight against polio.
There was a lot of concern that it was written by a person who was a professional journalist, and that they were afraid that people would no longer immunize their children against polio.
According to a report in WorldNet Daily, some of the richest men and women in the world met secretly in New York recently. When the world's wealthiest individuals hold secret meetings, it's time to pay attention. In 1910, the 6 wealthiest men in the world met at Jekyll Island, Georgia. That meeting resulted in the creation, 3 years later, of the largest criminal enterprise ever devised, the Federal Reserve, so-called. Judging from the list of participants, the recent meeting in New York may result in something even more monumental. The London Times identified them as Bill Gates, David Rockefeller, Ted Turner, Oprah Winfrey, Warren Buffett, George Soros, and New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Based on the Forbes magazine list of billionaires, the room had a net worth of about $120 billion. With all the bailout figures we've heard recently, it doesn't sound like that much. Believe me, it is. $120 billion is about equal to the annual budget for all of New York State, from New York City to Buffalo, and everything in between. The meeting, which took place in early May, was at the home of Sir Paul Nurse, a British Nobel Prize-winning biochemist and president of Rockefeller University. Microsoft's founder, Bill Gates, called the meeting. The London Times reported the informal afternoon session was so discreet that some of the billionaires' aides were told they were at security briefings. Discreet is the British way of saying secret. I do not believe that it is coincidental that this meeting came only a couple of weeks after another super secret and more powerful group met in the secrecy in Greece, the Bilderberg Group. They have advocated a one-world government for at least a century. They also see themselves as the elite saviors of mankind. According to the Times, the billionaires were each given 15 minutes to present their favorite cause. Over dinner, they discussed how they might settle on an umbrella cause that could harness their interests. Taking their cue from Gates, the report said they agreed that population control was the #1 issue. Experts say the global population will top 7 billion in 2012. According to reports at the meeting, Bill Gates outlined a plan to cap the global population at 8.3 billion. It all sounds so civilized, doesn't it? Here's the less politically correct but more accurate version. A group of unelected liberals with more money than many governments have just decided how many people will be permitted to live. This group of self-appointed governors will now have to draw up criteria to be used to decide who will not be permitted to live and how they will die. It can and will be dressed up in polite and civil terms, but in the end, it means certain people will have to die. In the final analysis, there's only one way to cap a population: by deciding who's permitted to live and who, for the good of all, must die.
Government people say we must be part of this new technology. This new technology is crazy science. It's unsafe science, and it's not proven science. And if we've had, in North America, 11, 12 years of GMOs, how come we don't have lots of food now to feed the hungry world? The corporations want total control of the seed supply, which will then give them total control of the food supply. In Japan, I met with a lot of scientists, consumers, and processors and importers. And this document here is a condensed version of all the scientific studies the Japanese have done using Monsanto's data. Is over 50 pages long. Monsanto always used the term substantially equivalent. The food is very similar, but the Japanese scientists say that it is not substantially equivalent. The food is different, and that you've changed through genetic engineering or genetic modification, you've changed the structure of the food, and it's not the same, and it can have very harmful allergens or bacteria, that because the viruses and the bacteria that they use for the transferring of genes are also in that food. So it is not the same, and it can have very possible long-range health effects by eating it. In other words, what Monsanto presented to our governments in North America is false, and that it is not safe and it's not substantially equivalent, which means it's not the same as other regular food. And that has been a major announcement by the Japanese scientists.
Topic that many medical professionals won't touch. Can childhood vaccinations be the cause of autism in some children?
WBTM 18 News reporter Zach Wheeler has been sifting through all the research and joins us now live in the studio with more. Zach.
Well, Jeff and Lee, we sat down with one local family who shared their story on how they believe their 2 children developed autism after they were vaccinated. What you're about to hear may just surprise you.
To give you an idea of what a happy...
As Barbara and Butch Lebrecht look through pictures of their kids, they can't help but wonder if they only knew what they know now. Their first son, Johnny, was born a normal and healthy boy, very strong and very alert. But after Johnny received his 4-month shots, he became very ill with chronic diarrhea. Doctors ruled out different allergies or colic.
We hospitalized him, and we questioned if it could be the vaccines at that point, because he had just had his vaccines right before that episode, and we were told no.
It was after his 12-month immunization that Johnny seemed to be getting worse.
The diarrhea came back, and within a week, we saw that he slowly started to lose his developmental functions. He suddenly wasn't the happy, playful, joyful baby and little toddler anymore. He was very removed.
The Lebrechts say several developmental professionals diagnosed Johnny with autism. It was a little more than a year and a half after Johnny was born that the Lebrechts celebrated the birth of their second child, Sierra. They were determined not to have her vaccinated, but say they were forced by the doctor to do so.
They took Sarah from my arms, and they vaccinated her that very night. She swelled up like a watermelon, turned purple-red from head to toe, body rash.
Within a week, Sierra was rushed upstate to Rochester Children's Hospital, fighting for her life. Her liver was failing and organs were seriously damaged. Doctors didn't think she would survive.
We believed she was vaccine injured. We knew she was. We saw her reaction that very night.
Sierra survived but had to be put on a feeding tube for 3 years. Like her brother, Sierra was also diagnosed with having autism, a condition that does not run in their family. Vaccine-induced autism is very controversial in the medical community. A study done by doctors and researchers in England in 1998 and more recently in 2006 suggested that there is a link between the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine and autism. The study suggests that the preservatives and ingredients in the vaccines could be causing autism in a significant number of children. Right now, the CDC says 1 in 150 children in the United States has autism.
Father Ben Zeller says his son, Little Ben, was a normal 11-month-old when he received the measles, mumps, and rubella shot in November of 2004. Within days, the child had a complete febrile seizure.
And this was an adverse reaction to the vaccine. There's no question in my mind.
Zeller was the first to prove his case in the federal vaccine court. Last August, the court ruled his son would never have experienced the seizure if it weren't for the MMR vaccine.
We have thousands of cases, and we can show all vaccines are causing exactly the same problem.
Canadian physician Andrew Moulton is spending the next week in South Florida interviewing families like the Zellers, gathering evidence for a study and class action lawsuit.
To stop this from going on, we have to hold it accountable in courts, because they will not stop doing this until they're held fiscally responsible.
Dr. Moulton has gathered more than 5,000 images of children's faces before and after the MMR to prove his case. It's the first collection of its kind, and one that Moulton hopes will be the final straw.
Thimerosal is a preservative that was put in vaccines back in the 1930s. Almost immediately after it was put in, autism cases began to appear. Autism had never been known before. It was unknown to science. Then the vaccines were increased in 1989 by the CDC and by a couple of other government agencies.
Okay, let me stop you there. That's an important date, and I'll tell you why. My son, born in 1991, has a slight form of autism called Asperger's. But it seems, and again, when I was practicing law, and also when I was in Congress, parents would constantly come to me, and they'd bring me videotapes of their children, and they were all around the age of my son or younger. So something happened in 1989.
Exactly. What happened was the vaccine schedule was increased. We went up from receiving about 10 vaccines in our generation to these kids received 24 vaccines. And they all had this thimerosal in them, this mercury, and nobody bothered to do an analysis of what the cumulative impact of all that mercury was doing to kids. As it turns out, we are injecting our children with 400 times the amount of mercury that FDA or EPA considers safe. A child on his first day that he's born is injected with a hepatitis B shot. Under EPA guidelines, he would have to be 275 pounds to safely absorb that shot.
The death dumps, otherwise known as chemical trails, are being dropped and sprayed throughout the United States, in England, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Europe, and I have personally seen them not only in the United States but in Mexico and Canada. Birds are dying around the world. Fish are dying by the hundreds of thousands around the world. This is genocide. This is poison. This is murder by the United Nations. This element within our society that's doing this must be stopped. I happen to know of 2 of the locations where the airplanes are that dump this crap on us. 4 of the planes are out of Air National Guard, Lincoln, Nebraska, and the other planes are out of Fort Still, Oklahoma. I personally have observed the planes that were standing still in Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, at the Air National Guard. They have no markings on them. They're huge, bomber-like airplanes with no markings. This is a crime. Crime against humanity, crime against America, crime against the citizens of this great country. They must be stopped. What is wrong with Congress? This has an effect on their population and their people and their friends and their relatives and themselves. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with the pilots who are flying these airplanes? They're dumping this crap, this poison, on their own families. Somebody has to do something about it. Somebody in Congress has to step forward and stop it now. Thank you. I'm Ted Gunderson.
The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make very high quality, and do this in just a jet in a very simple way, make high quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly in principle possible to do that. There's a big literature that's already looked at that. And you could do that by either building new versions of these aircraft or even re-engineering existing aircraft. So there's some ideas of that. So you go to an engineering firm and you want this done. They don't say this is hard or unusual. They say, okay, yes, we could do it. aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it. And it makes the problem of how we govern it fundamentally harder and different and novel. So I've told you that it's cheap to deliver materials to the stratosphere, and I'm convinced that's true. I don't think that will change. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look, the more complicated the environmental effects will look. And that's a good thing, because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and that the side effects are harder to manage, and that's a healthy outcome that will make it easier to do the management. Of course, the opposite reaction is possible. It's an empirical question how people will actually react to knowledge about this. Another reaction is to say, if these crazy scientists are so concerned about putting CO2 in the atmosphere, they want to think about these things, then that might actually mean we should be more serious about the risks of CO2 in the atmosphere. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Resource Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
The question is, what would be the effects of these materials on human health if they came down into the stratosphere, in particular small particles in aluminum?
So the collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who've focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in Bevel pencil and paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously. But if you're just thinking about the sheer number of particles and the human health impact of small particles, the answer is, while we haven't published it, that was the first thing we looked at with some of the leading experts who do epidemiological research on human health impacts, and it's not even close to being an issue.
So 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere would have no human health impact.
So let me be more careful here. To separate out the toxicological, so the alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing. The alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing.
Dane looked at him and he said, so you're telling me that spraying 10 to 20 megatons of aluminum, as you said, would have no human health effects? He took a deep breath and he swallowed and he said, let me be more careful here.
We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at.
And that, for me, that was the whole main point of what is going to be coming out to the public. It's the damaging effects of aluminum that are being found around the world in massive amounts. Here's David Keith confronted on this very issue, and he looked, at that point like they just let the cat out of the bag.
Mm-hmm. We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at.
They're proceeding because they have an agenda that's separate from trying to thwart this crisis of global warming. There's obviously several other objectives, whether it's depopulation, control, weapons aspects, communications aspects, all kinds of things, wild cards that we know nothing about.
So we'll do the same format. It'll be 3 minutes, and then time for questions. We'll start with Mr. Chaikin.
Anton Chaikin. I'm a historian and the history editor for Executive Intelligence Review. President Obama has put in place a reform apparatus reviving the euthanasia of Hitler Germany in 1939 that began the genocide there. The apparatus here is to deny medical care to elderly, chronically ill, and poor people, and thus save, as the president says, $2 to $3 trillion by taking lives considered not worthy to be lived, as the Nazi doctors said. Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel and other avowed cost cutters on this panel also lead a propaganda movement for euthanasia headquartered at the Hastings Center, of which Dr. Emanuel is a fellow. They shape public opinion and the medical profession to accept a death culture such as the Washington state law passed in November to let physicians help kill patients whose medical care is now rapidly being withdrawn in the universal health disaster. Dr. Emanuel's movement for bioethics and euthanasia and this council's purpose directly continue the eugenics movement that organized Hitler's killing of patients and then other costly and supposedly unworthy people. Dr. Emanuel wrote last October 12th that a crisis, war, and financial collapse would get the frightened public to accept the program. Hitler told Dr. Brandt in 1935 that the euthanasia program would have to wait until the war began to get the public to go along. Dr. Emanuel wrote last year that the Hippocratic Oath should be jumped. Doctors should no longer just serve the needs of the patient. Hoche and Binding, the German eugenicists, exactly said the same thing to start the killing. You on the council are drawing up the procedures list to be used to deny care, which will kill millions if it goes ahead in the present world crash. You think perhaps the backing of powerful men, financiers, will shield you from accountability, but you are now in the spotlight. Disband this council and reverse the whole course of this Nazi revival now.
Thank you. Quick break. I'm going to ask for questions and comments. Ms. Zuckerman, if you can come up, and I'm opening it up to the panel. Yes, we're still going to, Ms. Williams, you're still going to get to talk. I'm going to ask Ms. Zuckerman to come up and join you. We're going to take a quick stop in the panel to open it up for comments or questions. We have a few folks who have to potentially go. The whole transcript will be available, though, and all comments will be shared with all council members. I apologize that I have to go back to an important meeting. I do want to just clarify one thing about my own, since my reputation has been besmirched here, is I think I do have a very long record of writing against the legalization of euthanasia. So the association of me and that seemed a little strange, given, I don't know, at least 30 years or 25 years of writing on the topic against the legalization. So just to clarify the record for everyone in the room. Thank you.
Wait, can...
No.
Medical care, which accomplishes the same thing. So you had this article with Margaret Batten, who is an accomplished...
Sir, it's not a... Your statement was read into the record. It's not the time for debate, but we appreciate your comments. And we apologize for the break in the panel, but we just wanted to have that break.
For the first 25 years of practice, I promoted water fluoridation aggressively. I thought I saw the benefits. It wasn't until I actually looked at the information myself and sat down and looked at the different government agencies and the different reports and the studies that I began to realize that fluoridation was a problem. One of the first things I did is I looked at my tube of toothpaste. It says drug facts. I know it's a drug. If I were to give it to you, it'd have to be a prescription. That's for swallowing. When it comes to toothpaste, it also says don't swallow. And if you do swallow, contact a poison control center. Well, the amount of fluoride that they're talking about is a pea-sized amount of fluoride. You probably don't see that in advertisements, a pea-sized amount of fluoride. Usually when I see an advertisement, it looks more like a Dairy Queen ice cream cone. That amount is 1/4 milligram of fluoride. Well, that's the same amount of fluoride as what we find in 8 ounces of water. 1/4 milligram of fluoride, 1/4 milligram of fluoride. Don't swallow. If you do, call the Poison Control Center.
Fluoride. Dentists say that drinking it can protect your teeth against cavities. cities and towns all across the world actually dump it into the water supply, hoping to indiscriminately medicate the population through their tap water faucets. The official story on fluoride sounds wonderful. Drink the stuff and you won't get cavities, we're told. It's a nice story. But there's another side to this story, the side you're never told. And it starts with the astonishing but verifiable fact that nearly all the fluoride dripped into municipal water supplies isn't naturally occurring fluoride at all. In fact, it's actually a combination of hexafluorosilicic acid and sodium silicofluoride. These two chemicals are considered highly toxic by the EPA. They're actually classified as hazardous waste, and when packaged for transportation, they must be labeled as poison and handled by workers wearing industrial safety gear. So, what are hexafluorosilicic acid and sodium silicofluoride, and where do they come from? That's the part of this story that you probably won't believe. That is, not until you check it out for yourself. Because the more you look into the mythology of fluoride, the more bizarre this story becomes. And this bizarre story begins at phosphate mining companies. Phosphate is an important mineral used in fertilizers. It's mined from natural rock deposits scattered across the world, and the phosphate rock is then refined to produce phosphoric acid. If that name sounds familiar, that's because it's one of the main ingredients in carbonated sodas, such as Coke and Pepsi. Phosphoric acid is often compared to battery acid. It's a highly acidic liquid that is believed to be the primary reason why drinking sodas can result in kidney stones and a loss of bone mineral density. Phosphate rock is also used to create fertilizers. The problem is phosphate is often contaminated with high levels of fluoride, as much as 40,000 parts per million, or up to 4% of the raw ore. To remove the fluoride, sulfuric acid is added to a wet slurry of phosphate and water. This causes the fluoride to vaporize, creating highly toxic gaseous compounds such as hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride. These toxic fluoride chemicals used to be released directly from the smokestacks of phosphate mining operations, but the nearby farms suffered devastating losses of cattle and food crops, which withered away and died due to, guess what? Fluoride poisoning. In order to stop this environmental destruction, the phosphate mining industry put in place a way to capture the toxic fluoride chemical vapors so that they wouldn't be released into the air and kill the surrounding livestock and vegetation. This was accomplished by installing wet scrubbers that captured the toxic fluoride chemicals, preventing them from being released into the environment and killing the plant and animal life living nearby. It is from these wet scrubbers that toxic fluoride chemicals are now harvested. They're collected, repackaged, shipped to your local city, and then dumped into the municipal water supply. So instead of these toxic fluoride chemicals being released by the phosphate mining smokestacks, they are instead captured and then released into the water supply of large cities, where the chemicals then contaminate the water of millions of people at a time. This is called water fluoridation. When dentists and doctors say they support fluoride in the water supply, what they're really saying is that they support the mass poisoning of the population with a highly toxic hazardous waste product that, if it weren't dripped into the water supply, it would have to be disposed of as a highly toxic hazardous waste under strict EPA regulations. Curiously, it is a violation of federal law to dump hexafluorosilicic acid or sodium silicofluoride into the water. Such an act, in fact, is considered an act of terrorism.
Absolutely nothing that I'm going to tell you is exaggerated, is interpolated, or is imagined. Everything I'm going to tell you is documented, and a great deal of it is documented on my website, which is www.healthfreedomusa, one word, healthfreedomusa.org. And so they created a trade commission. That's a very important pair of words. A trade commission called the Codex Alimentarius Commission. It is not a public health commission. It is not a consumer protection commission. It is a trade commission. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Dangerous industrial poisons. As poisons, we have to be protected from them. What we're talking about is waking up one morning and being very surprised to find that high-potency, therapeutically effective, clinically significant nutrients are now illegal in the way that heroin is illegal. Not available with a prescription. Illegal. Every animal used for food on the planet, whether it has fins, feet, or feathers, every animal on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics. Must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormone. Codex requires, mandates that all food be irradiated unless it's eaten locally and raw. All food, including organic food, of course. So is it organic afterwards? Go to Codex Alimentarius, do a Google search, and look, there are drop-down menus at the top of the official Codex page. Look at the toxins and the veterinary chemicals and the levels that are set. They are terrifying. In 2001, 176 countries, including the United States, got together and they said there are 12 really bad organic chemicals. They're called POPs, persistent organic pollutants. There are a lot of them, but there are 12 that are so bad that nobody could disagree that those 12 POPs had to be banned worldwide. Codex has brought back seven of the 9 forbidden POPs that 176 countries banned worldwide. Dieldrin, Aldrin, hexachlorobenzene. And the food that is imported from other countries that contains these substances cannot be stopped at our borders, because otherwise it would be, God forbid, a trade violation. That's how Codex works. In the WHO-FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, they estimate, they're the experts, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone, when it goes into global implementation, will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big, billion deaths. 1 billion through simple starvation. Those folks who die are not particularly economically successful from the point of view of the corporations. But the next 2 billion, they will die from the preventable diseases of undernutrition. Who will live? Probably those people who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to have their own pushers of clean food and nutrients.
Really, whether you need it or not, it's a virtual medicine cabinet in your tap water if you live in many, many areas across the country. There's a scary new report out today. The Associated Press did a big amount of research on this, and the findings show that there were traces of prescription drugs in the water supply used by 41 million Americans in some of the biggest cities in the U.S. The list includes over-the-counter pain medication, mood stabilizers, even hormones. CNN's Elizabeth Cohen joins us now from the Medical Update desk in Atlanta. First, explain where they found it and what it is that they found, Elizabeth.
Well, the Associated Press, Karen, they spent 5 months investigating this, and they looked at various municipal water supplies. Not all of them keep track of whether or not they're pharmaceuticals, but the ones that do, they all had traces of various medicines. And I'm going to give you a list. This will give you some idea of the kinds of things that they found. For example, in Atlanta, where I am right now, they found that the water contained traces of antibiotics, blood pressure drugs. In Cincinnati, cholesterol drugs, they found a trace of one of those, and estrogen that women sometimes take for medicinal reasons. And in New York City, they found a trace of a seizure drug and an anti-anxiety drug. Now, to give you sort of the big picture, how many drugs did they find in the drinking water? In Philadelphia, they found trace amounts of 56 different drugs. In New York City, they found traces of 16 drugs, and in northern New Jersey, 13 drugs.
Ladies and gentlemen, the origins of the environmental movement as we see it began back in 1968 when the Club of Rome was formed. The Club of Rome has been described as a crisis think tank which specialises in crisis creation. The main purpose of this think tank was to formulate a crisis that would unite the world and condition us to the idea of global solutions to local problems. In a document called The First Global Revolution, authored by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider, on pages 104 and 105, it stated, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers, of course, will be caused by human intervention that will require a global response." That's the origin of global warming, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry. In 1992, former President of the United States, George Bush Sr. said, "Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action will be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level. Cutting through the code, I want everyone to consider what the words profound reorientation of all human society and unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources actually means. For everyone here tonight not familiar with Agenda 21, I would suggest that this is the beginning of your learning curve, not the end. In 1992, Maurice Strong, Secretary General of the UN Earth Summit and member of the Club of Rome, said, "It is clear that current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, consumption of large amounts of frozen and convenience foods, use of fossil fuels, ownership of motor vehicles, small electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. Put those statements together with the previous one, and it must become clear that Agenda 21 is about controlling every aspect of our lives: how we eat, what we eat, how much we eat, how we move around, food production, the amount of food, and where we even live. Dixie Ray, former Washington State Governor and Assistant Secretary for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, stated, Agenda 21 seeks to establish a mechanism for transferring the wealth from citizens to the third world. Fear of environmental crisis would be used to create a world government and UN central direction. From a report in the 1976 UN's Habitat 1 conference, land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, if you work hard and you exercise good financial management and invest in property, you are contributing to social injustice. In a report from the President's Council on Sustainable Development, we need a new collaborative decision process that leads to better decisions, more rapid change, and more sensible use of human, natural and financial resources in achieving our goals. And at the same time, Harvey Rubin, Vice Chair of the Wildlands Project, says individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective. J. Gary Lawrence, advisor to President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development, participating in a UN advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy fixated groups and individuals in our society, and here we are. This segment of our society, who fear one world government and UN invasion, through which our individual freedoms will be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking Agenda 21. So we will call our process something else. We will call it comprehensive planning, or growth management, or smart growth. We ended up with sustainable development. The redeployment of human and financial resources has now become visible to us all via the cut to services and programs to assist the sick, the young, the elderly, and of course the creation of another level of poverty now identified by the term the working poor. I was speaking to a person last week and he said to me, if Hitler was still around, he'd be sitting back thinking, I didn't need bullets for a global takeover. And he'd be right. We see daily cash grabbing via new taxes called levies, supposedly because we are cash strapped in this state, and at the same time see big project spending that does not fit with the message that we are in financial crisis. But we the people have to tighten our belt, while the government seems absolutely unaware and unconcerned of the amount of debt that it is accumulating. This in turn means that taxes, levies, fines and other penalties increase, as well as the cost of living rising exponentially, and the ordinary citizen's ability to exist well is compromised with almost every law that we pass. We're constantly paying for so-called services that we don't receive. This is wealth redistribution at the grassroots level, redeployment of financial resources, ensuring only hardship for the citizens who just really want to get on with their lives. The Parliament has also ventured into the rights of people to own and retain their property and manage it without government interference. In particular, the laws around, as Peter said, water allocation, natural resource management, the Native Vegetation Act, Development and Planning Act, which are all equally toxic to our food producers as they are to our long-term security, we city dwellers. Everyone needs to remember we all pay a natural resource management levy on our tax rates. So this is not just going to affect the food producers. The intrusions into our property that Peter was talking about that land producers are going through will roll out into the suburbs and into the city because they have the authority to do that. This government has been working overtime to take away our rights to common law through many pieces of legislation. Common law is what guarantees us an ability to correct injustices. This coming year, I promise you, you will also hear debate over a number of pieces of legislation that will further erode our common law rights. And you have to get behind me on this, ladies and gentlemen, to stop this from going through. As Agenda 21 became more and more apparent to me, I began using the line in Parliament that government was now declaring war on its own citizens. And that goes back as far as 2008. This, of course, led me to being labelled a conspiracy theorist. But here we are now, openly talking about Agenda 21 and the ramifications we will see in a short period of time if this is not stopped in its tracks. Up and participate in the democratic process, and to do that you need to understand the parliamentary and political system that you are trying to rein in. In 1972, the Club of Rome published the alarmist Limits to Growth document, warning of worldwide overpopulation, the need for sustainable development. This was the beginning of the slow process of social engineering and programming people to accept that the planet is struggling to sustain life. On the 8th of October 1973, the New York Times reported a quote from Ted Turner, also Club of Rome. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. In 1987, Mikhail Gorbachev, also a member of Club of Rome, said, "We are moving toward a new world order, the world of communism, and we shall never turn off that road." He also quoted in 1996 Monetary and Economic Review on page 5, "The environmental crisis will be the international disaster that will unlock the new world order, one world government." In 1992 came the Earth Summit, which produced the document called the Earth Charter. This document was co-written by Maurice Strong, long-time globalist, elitist, member of Club of Rome, and Mikhail Gorbachev. Both Strong and Gorbachev stated that it was hoped that this document would be adopted as the new 10 Commandments, with environmentalism as the new one world religion. Out of this summit came Agenda 21. Ted Turner, who was also a member of the Club of Rome, was quoted as saying in 1996, "The total population of 250 to 300 million people is ideal. That means a reduction of 95% from present levels would be even more ideal." Anyone who abhors the China one-child policy is simply a dum-dum. In 1998, the Baltimore Sun reported on July the 7th, most of Ted Turner's first donation to the UN of $22 million went to programs that seek to stall population. Another goal of the depopulation process is that the upcoming generation will submit to sterilisation to save Mother Earth.
We begin tonight with a tale of two speeches, both from the same man, both from President Obama. One speech that could have been billed as a ballad to the Constitution, a proclamation of American values, a repudiation of the lawless behavior of the last presidential administration, and another speech announcing a radical new claim of presidential power that is not afforded by the Constitution and that has never been attempted in American history, even by George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Remarkably, President Obama today made both of those speeches simultaneously. Standing inside the National Archives in front of the actual original Constitution, President Obama delivered a blistering critique of the Bush administration, in which he called their actions and their legacy literally a mess.
Our government made a series of hasty decisions. Poorly planned, haphazard approach. Too often, we set those principles aside as luxuries that we could no longer afford. Our government made decisions based on fear rather than foresight. The decisions that were made over the last 8 years established an ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable.
An ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable. Ouch. Then, moments later, he announced his own ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism. President Obama today proposed something new, something called prolonged detention. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Prolonged detention. Did you ever see the movie Minority Report? It was based on a Philip K. Dick short story. It came out in 2002. It starred Tom Cruise, remember? He played a police officer in something called the Department of Pre-Crime. Pre-crime is where people are arrested and incarcerated to prevent crimes that they have not yet committed.
Mr. Marks, by mandate of the District of Columbia Pre-Crime Division, I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubin. Take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours, 4 minutes. No, I didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything, but you're gonna. Future murder. Creepy, right? Putting somebody in jail not for what they've done, but for what you're very sure they're going to do?
There may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes. In some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States.
We're not prosecuting them for past crimes, but we need to keep them in prison because of our expectation of their future crimes.
Al-Qaeda terrorists and their affiliates are at war with the United States, and those that we capture, like other prisoners of war, must be prevented from attacking us again.
Prevented. We will incarcerate people preventively. Preventive incarceration. Indefinite detention without trial. That's what this is. That's what President Obama proposed today, if you strip away the euphemisms. One civil liberties advocate told the New York Times today, quote, "We've known this was on the horizon for many years, but we were able to hold it off with George Bush. The idea that we might find ourselves fighting with the Obama administration over these powers is really stunning."
Perhaps the most startling thing that I can share with you is that all of the conspiracy theories that you've ever heard about one world government, about the UN takeover of the world, all of those conspiracies have now been laid to rest. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. It's all published.
If you live in the heartland of America, you have to listen up. While the nation was distracted with the Anthony Weiner drama, President Obama signed an executive order that will seize greater power over food, fiber, and energy in our vast countryside area.
It was during that study in which I began to realize that this was not an effort to protect the environment, but an effort to control you and I.
The world is going more and more deeply into a general breakdown crisis, which would probably result in the elimination, within a generation or two, of 2/3 of the present level of the world's population.
Joining me now is radio host Ben Ferguson. Hey, Ben, President Reagan, 50 years ago, he started talking about this, and look what we got now. We have a White House Rural Council. Are you nervous about this?
Sure, and anybody that's in rural America should be worried about this, because what they're saying is we're going to look at what you're doing in your life, and if we seem that you're not somehow using your land to the advantage of the overall American people, then we may have some quote-unquote maybe strong suggestions for you. I mean, look at the people in Minot, North Dakota, for example, this week, who are having to deal with the government, and guess what? They didn't do it right with the levees there, so even when there's a place with a lot of people, they say, hey, why would I want the government telling me what to do with my farmland? Because that area there is massively involved with farm. What, are they going to walk in with the defense secretary and start telling them where they should farm, how they should farm, and what they should do with their land? I mean, this to me scares me.
And then I stumbled on page 993, and friends, if you don't think that's some heavy reading at night, page 993, after describing these protected areas, sums it all up by saying the recently published Wildlands Project in the United States is the central theme of protected areas. And on page 15 of the Wildlands Project, Dr. Reed Noss says that we must convert at least 50% of the land area of North America to wilderness, off limits to human beings.
Go ahead, Chris Plant, you're up.
Well, yeah, who knows how it's going to turn out, but it's good. It's real good. This is another demonstration of this administration's obsessive-compulsive government disorder. They've decided that government needs to seep in. And it's not just, you shouldn't just be worried if you're in the heartland. We should all be worried about this. This is government out of control. This is crazy. This is over the top. This is one of hundreds of sort of organizations and commissions and panels that this administration has created to wheedle their way into our lives on what kind of light bulbs we can use and how much broccoli we can eat and what we can drive and what our kids have to eat at school. And they're just seeking to control
Tony,
every area of our lives.
Certainly feels like overreach to me.
Not only overreach, Eric, I mean, it's so frightening. This is 16% of America, what's considered rural America, who basically is now going to have its entire livelihood run by government in Washington. They're far away from Washington. They like it that way, is my guess. I think Mr. Ferguson certainly sounds like he's representing that point of view.
Those core wilderness areas are to be interconnected by wilderness corridors off limits to human beings. Those wilderness areas are to be surrounded by buffer zones that may have limited resource use under the supervision and permitting of the federal government, in collaboration with non-government organizations. Human population is to be resettled into the remaining 25% of the land, into communities that are described as sustainable communities.
As more and more of many among you have learned